This is the Wolf Wake Up Call. Our guests today are Renee Price and Freddy Parker.
We were going to have Renee and Freddie on a couple of weeks ago, and we gave them, our contact gave them the wrong time. So we're very delighted that they could come today, but we're having a little bit of a jinx on this because Renee last night, in the middle of giving a presentation, developed a sudden case of laryngitis. So she's here to cheer us on and smile at us, and Freddy Parker is going to, who's a professor at NC Central, not retired, still
Retired, but teaching me one course per semester.
still keeping your hands in and
Keeping my feet wet.
yeah. And so he's here gonna be holding the fort, and Renee may get a miraculous recovery in the middle of the program, and she will chime forth if she does. But we're so delighted that both of you could come, and particularly Freddie, that you kept your health, because this is not the weather to be very healthy. To easily get in trouble
Exactly.
with colds and all kinds of bugs. So what today's, it's going to lead in, today's News and Observer had a front page article about our very topic tonight, which is, it says, area events commemorate those killed in lynching. And this is something that most of us were not taught very much about. It was mentioned as kind of an aside. And the history is being corrected because it was a major terrorist campaign to keep blacks from having the temerity to try to vote or to stand up for themselves. And so we're going to talk about the whole idea of that, but also what's happening in Orange County to educate us. So where should we start, Freddie?
I think we'll start, I guess, with an overview of lynching in the United States. There's some debate among scholars as to how the term lynch became a part of the American vernacular as it relates to putting a noose around a person's neck, and scholars generally agree that the term is derived from the activities of Colonel Charles Lynch, who was commander, Colonel Charles Lynch, who was commander of the Virginia Army during the American Revolution. And of course, he was a patriot. He was appointed by George Washington. And there were these loyalists, those individuals who supported the British cause. When they did something and you couldn't take them to court, sometimes extra legal means were used. And often they would be taken out into barns, and they would be strung up by their thumbs, and they had to exclaim, "Liberty forever, liberty forever." And we do know that of course, some were killed. And over the years, during the 1780s, 90s, and thereafter, when people took the law into their own hands, it was referred to a lynching because of the activities of Colonel Charles Lynch. Lynchburg, Virginia is named in honor of his brother. So that is essentially how the term became a part of the American vocabulary as it related to actually putting the noose around a person's neck. We know that people have been executed in this way for hundreds, for thousands of years, but at least here in the United States, it's referred to as a lynching as a result of that.
Okay, so Lynchburg, Virginia was not named for lynching of blacks, was named for this, the brother of the Colonel Lynch, who was a patriot in the Revolutionary War?
Exactly.
Oh, because I would have thought that's a bad town to go to. It may still be a bad town to go to, but that's not what his naming was about.
No.
Our current idea of lynching.
Right.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I guess during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, actually into the period after the Civil War, most of the people lynched in the United States were white men who lived in the western part of the United States, and they were lynched for a variety of crimes, and including stealing horses, stealing cattle, murder, and so much more. But the idea here is, the point that I want to make is that most of those individuals lynched were white males. It becomes a black victim phenomenon after Reconstruction, when blacks have been freed, they're out there, so to speak, on their own. Whites looked at them as being out of control, so we need to do something to keep them under control. We need to try to maintain the status quo. And the Chicago Tribune shows us in 1882 that most of the people lynched in the U.S. were black males. So after 1880, it becomes a black male victim phenomenon. And over the period 1882, when the Chicago Tribune began keeping those records, down to the 1960s, nearly 5,000 people were lynched in the U.S. 73% of them were black, 27% white and others, and about 60 of those were female.
Wow. So this was Reconstruction, primarily Reconstruction. But you said to the 1960s it went on. That was way after Reconstruction. That was right into the Civil Rights Movement.
Oh, surely.
So that also was not wanting that to get out of hand, I guess, or to keep control.
Well, I mean, racism, discrimination continued through the 1960s and continues right down to the present time. I mean, we continue to see acts of violence perpetrated against people. A classic example, a young man who plays on the show Empire was beaten yesterday or sometime in the last couple of days.
Yes.
Homophobic as well as for racial reasons.
Yes,
So
that was on the
It was a
news.
hate crime, without a doubt.
That was on the news this morning. Oh, I know it continues, but you would think that the law would be doing better as it got into, into the 50s and 60s. You would think maybe more modern times. But yes, it happened even just yesterday or the day before. So I guess when this hate-filled people, they can strike wherever and whenever.
And the United States government never passed an anti-lynching bill. States passed, some of the states passed anti-lynching bills, but they were very ineffective. North Carolina passed one in the in 1891, and as it turns out, in effect, it said that in order for a lynching to have taken place, the lynch victim must have been in the hands of authorities. So it meant that a person had to break into jail, take the person out. Lynching, that's a lynching. But if you went home after you allegedly committed a crime and somebody came in, mob came in and took you out and lynched you, then that was not considered a lynching.
Okay.
So in essence, nobody was actually arrested, convicted until we get to about 1906.
Okay. So then, when did it start a backlash to that? When did there start to be a real revulsion about taking the law into your own hands and doing that? When did that start?
When did it start?
Yeah.
I mean,
When was it that it was something was done about it, or people were starting to talk about that this is wrong, or?
I think there was always a segment of the population that fought against these terrorist acts, but their voices were usually in the minority, and there was always the fear that your voice would be silenced. We look at the terror that took place after 1865. It becomes a festival in many cases. So many people who were part of the community participated to a great extent. So it was a very, very small group of people. Every now and then you'd have an organization to emerge. A group of white women started an organization in the 19 teens. We know that the NAACP worked hard to stop lynching. We also know that Booker T. Washington and the folks down at Tuskegee, George H. White, who was the last black congressman in North Carolina during the Reconstruction period, post-Reconstruction period, introduced legislation that died in committee. He tried to make lynching a capital offense, and then individuals would be charged with treason against the United States government. But that kind of legislation couldn't pass in the U.S. House of Representatives where he was.
Well, that's when you mentioned that it became, in certain places, a festival. That's what I was thinking of, where it was so accepted at a certain period, particularly in the South. I don't think that may have happened in the North, but where that was the shock that I think for many of us finding out in recent years, that it was not surreptitious, a group of men doing it in the dark of night. This was a picnic. This was where they brought their children. In a couple of cases, there were like 1,000 people to see somebody be tortured and killed. And so that's what I meant, that there was a certain acceptance, if not enjoyment, a sadistic enjoyment, and people weren't ashamed of it. And that's what I meant with, when did that tide turn, where it was not something you were going to brag about, or not something you were going to take your children to?
It didn't really come to an end. I mean, people continued to participate in gang violence through the 40s, through the 50s, through the 60s, through the 70s. I mean, there was always an outcry against violence. But as I said before, those individuals were definitely in the minority.
Yeah.
And the fear that your voice could be
For
silenced.
them to speak up is...
Oh, yeah. Killed. Absolutely. The KKK, the Knights of White Camellia, the Red Shirts, so many different organizations and non-organizations could possibly strike out against you.
Yeah, because I moved here in the 60s to Durham and got involved with the local anti-poverty agency, and our neighborhood went up in smoke. I mean, we were shunned, my kids were spit on. This was as a white person just getting involved and having a couple of little kids at my house one day, and that was in the mid-60s. To speak up or to do something when people are feeling that their way of life is being threatened can be dangerous.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. So it's continued, and so Brian Stevenson, a civil rights lawyer, started investigating. Researching?
Well,
or was he part of a whole group that they were doing this research on finding the names of people, and honoring their names? And
well, you're talking about in more recent times, but surely as early as the 1890s, and because by 1905, James Cutler had come out with his book, one of the first scholars to actually write about lynching. Cutler found that more than 3,000 people had already been lynched in the United States. And the NAACP, when it came along after 1909, and surely the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and the folks down at Tuskegee, led by a man whose name was Monroe Work, went about gathering information. So there were always these efforts to name the names, to name the locations, to be very specific in terms of who these victims were.
Oh, good. And keeping a record.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A long record. Okay. And of course, Ida B. Wells, who began, I think maybe 1892, wrote a book entitled On Lynchings. So yes, there's always been this struggle on the part of people to deal with this ugly, gory episode in American history from the very beginning.
So there were records kept from the very beginning.
Yes.
And names and places.
Yeah, the Chicago Tribune actually began listing the names of those victims.
Good for them.
And some of they actually had correspondents who came down into the South and who actually studied lynching. Walter White, who was executive secretary of the NAACP, wrote a book in 1929 called Rope and Faggot. And he actually, because of his complexion, he was able to go around. He was an octoroon, a person who was
light color,
very, very fair complexion.
Yeah.
And didn't actually participate in lynchings, but he actually went around after lynchings occurred. And so he writes in his book about some of those ugly, gory episodes. He talked about the killing of Mary Turner that took place in Valdosta, Georgia, in 1918. Probably one of the ugliest ones that I've come across. Mary Turner was the wife of Henry Turner. Henry Turner was black, and he and some of his friends worked for a man there in Valdosta, a white man who didn't pay them. One thing led to another. They killed him. White mob got together and began killing those individuals, and Henry Turner was killed. Mary decided that she would go to the authorities and report this incident. The mob found out about that and began to pursue her. And as it turns out, they caught her, found her, hung her from a tree. They actually suspended her by her feet, and her body was dangling like this. They then ripped open her stomach, and out fell this 8-month-old fetus. They stomped the life out of the fetus, and then poured some flammable liquid on her and burned her.
Oh.
And Walter White actually came along after that lynching and actually saw the ashes from that particular terroristic act.
So with something as horrendous as that, did that make people stop and think, or did it?
I think there was probably a correlation between some of these ugly, gory acts and people deciding that they wanted to do something.
Yeah.
It's like when the Montgomery bus boycott occurred in 1955, or the lynching of Emmett Till sparked.
Oh, that.
A lot of people will tell you.
55, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, August 28, 1955. A lot of people will tell you that I became involved in the civil rights movement as a result of the killing of Emmett Till in 1955. So.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah. And now talk about speaking up. His mother was incredible.
Yes.
You know, they wanted to just say, oh, we'll bury him with closed casket, and she insisted on having his body brought there and having an open casket.
Want the world to see.
People could see what they did to her son. I mean, that was so incredible. And thousands of people came by, and I think that I think galvanized.
Yeah, because you had coverage. Actually, a lot of European reporters came to the United States to actually.
Oh, did they?
Oh, yeah. To report on that lynching.
What a barbaric
Exactly.
country we are. That sure didn't help foreign policy for us to be as hypocritical as we tend to be, for at least a while there. You know, that was, because that's not that long ago. Not that long ago for many of us remember that. Yeah. So it's got a long and horrendous history.
Exactly. And some people argue that, well, it was only about 5,000. You know, each of those victims had a family. Each of those individuals, each was a human being. So I lose my father, I lose my mother. What happens to the family? Possibly disintegration of the family. So you have to look past the numbers and look at all of the domino effects that occurred as a result of losing a family member.
Yeah, family member, and families were stayed close to home then, extended family, the community, people knew each other. It was a primarily rural society then, so the ripple effect, and of course just what the perpetrators wanted, the terror, you know, when you see that happen in a family and ripped apart, and the horror of it, how it was done, that was certainly had a chilling effect on anybody thinking about speaking up or speaking out. Sure did.
Oftentimes they wanted blacks to see these lynchings because that would teach them a lesson. Don't get involved in this kind of activity or that activity. Stay in your place, in essence, is what they were trying to get across.
It was a real terror campaign, and I think we're so quick to label a foreign person that we think is going to come to harm us as a terrorist, but we're very careful or very reluctant to name or domestic terrorism. And that was a whole reign of terror. I mean, that's of course including the whole coup d'etat in Wilmington.
Exactly.
That the News and Observer has apologized for, that were very instrumental in whipping up that fervor and fear. Yeah.
I mean, the race riots that continued, well, sometimes we don't even refer to them as race riots because they were, as in one case, the coup d'etat. These are actually murderous kinds of events that took place. And surely the Wilmington case, the Brownsville case, the Atlantic riot, the Atlanta riots, and the ones that took place in 1965 in Detroit and New Jersey and other places around the country, in many cases were more than just a racial riot. It was a slaughtering.
You're right, it was a massacre.
It was.
And I know there's John Hope Franklin, his father had gone to get a practice of law or some kind of a business going in a town with something like Rose something or other.
Tulsa, Oklahoma is where he was.
Yeah,
Tulsa.
and they wiped out that town.
Exactly.
That was
Rosewood.
Rosewood.
Down in 1923, down in Florida.
And that's still not recognized in history, people. That every time blacks tried to get a good business going, or in fact sometimes they would try to hide that they were doing well with the farm because that was just an invitation to be, slaughtered or wiped out or hurt in some way because the people were so jealous or so threatened. Yeah, that was, I think there were some towns that were predominantly black that when they were thriving, they would just go and massacre the town.
Those happened without a doubt.
Yeah. So there's a terrorist, brutal history that a lot of us are just beginning to know more about in recent years.
More and more research is being done, and I'm really happy to see a young group of scholars, black, white, Asian, who are doing an absolutely wonderful job at looking at history in a microcosmic way, rather than looking at this grand scheme. That is actually going down to the core and looking at history in microcosm rather than macrocosm.
Yes, instead of the grand ideas, getting those specifics, because that's what makes it so real.
Exactly. Like for example, it used to be that we would deal with, you write a book on slavery in North Carolina, slavery in the United States, but what we see now is that these younger group of scholars are actually looking at slavery in microcosm to the extent that they're looking at it at the county level, but even more specific than that, at the plantation level. I had a student to write a master's thesis on Pitt County, North Carolina, but he actually looked at one plantation in Pitt County, North Carolina.
And who was that?
A former student.
A former student?
Right.
Wow. Are we due to have a station break? And maybe we could put the lights on. It's getting kind of dark here. If that would be okay.
This is the Wolf Wake Up Call on WCOM LP 103.5 on your FM dial, also live streaming at WCOMFM.org.
Okay, and this is when we do some announcements. We take a little station break here and catch our breath. There's going to be, just in this topic that we're talking about, the new, not so new, but emphasis on finding out more about the lynchings that went on, about our history, the terrorism that went on, and so that there's going to be a free symposium, and I think we'll be talking more about that February 2nd, this Saturday, and that will be lynching, racial terror, and the monuments of hate, and it's going to be held from 10 until 3. This Saturday, February 2 till 2. This is a misprint. Oh, okay. 10 until 2, 4 hours, and stretch our legs and take a break then. February 2nd at the Passmore Center, 103 Meadowlands Drive in Hillsborough. And that is the senior center in Hillsborough, right near the Sportsplex. And you can register at, I won't go through this long thing, I guess just go to, what would be a shortcut from this long, well, I'll read it then. http://tiny, TINYARORL .com/ this is too long. I just think call up the Seymour Center or call up the Passmore Center or call up the county and find out more about it. Or just show up and surprise them on 10 o'clock at the Passmore Center, the Senior Center in Hillsborough. Okay, and then we're going to mention each week we're having our annual HK on J on February 9th, and that we have, I think it's 13 or 14 years now, and HK on J, Historic Thousands on Jones Street, that Reverend William J. Barber started several years ago, and this is for us all to let the legislature know that we're out there and the issues that we're concerned about. And it's like our organization, the Women's International League, we're a multi-issue because they're all connected. So this is to do with education, with voting, with health, all the major issues that we're all deeply concerned about. So whatever, or war and peace, all of that. So these thousands usually come, and it's a major march. And so try to show up. Anybody can show up, and it's very exciting to be at. And there's usually some terrific speakers. So that's going to be on the 9th. We'll be mentioning it each week. Okay, those are the two main things that are going on, but I do want to mention that on Friday we're starting February, and this is traditionally Black History Month, so we're particularly happy to be talking about this topic today, which is so powerful about the history that people have endured and have kept going and are doing well, but it's been, everything was against blacks doing well in this country, and it's just a testament to endurance and strength. And so we're going to be probably having something else on. I'm going to try to get somebody on to talk about Frederick Douglass, and that would be a wonderful thing to have one of the heroes. We're talking about the victims and the tragedies, and I'd like to balance that and have something about the heroes. And so we'll try to have that on in a couple of weeks. Next week, however, we are going to have Tom Hoban back and talking about climate crisis. So now back to our guests. We have Renee Price, who's sitting here silently, smiling and cheering us on with a bad case of laryngitis. And we have Freddy Parker, who is a North Carolina Central history professor. And he's talking to us about this whole a program on lynching and the uncovering of so much history that most of us were not taught in school and are learning in our adult years. And I think it's just so important to get a fuller picture of our history than the sometimes prettier picture that is painted for us. Yeah, I remember seeing a book being someplace about things that you were not taught in school, and there's a lot that we were not taught that we needed to be taught. So Professor Parker is here, helping us learn some of the things we need to know.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad you could come. Yeah, in this cold weather. Yeah. So, where are we at? Did we get up to our present time with the, to talk about the beautiful new museum?
Yeah, the museum down
In Montgomery?
Alabama, yes.
Yes. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice.
Yeah, I think that it's about time that we have this. I think that so many people, by just looking at what's going on in the Research Triangle area, looking at several counties and their efforts to look at lynchings that took place in their specific areas, all of this connected in some way to what they're doing down in Montgomery, Alabama. And we actually started our organization last year, the Orange County Remembrance Community.
I got it right
Community-
here in the paper. The Orange County
Community
Community Remembrance
Yeah, organization.
Coalition.
Yeah,
And it says in the paper that Renee Price and you and James Williams and others are part of that Orange County.
I think for me the important term in that in the name of the organization is coalition. The fact that several different organizations have come together to look at not only lynching, but so many different aspects of the black experience in Orange County and I guess North Carolina as a whole. And so what is happening with this organization is that not only are we looking at lynching, but we have programs planned throughout the year. Something going on in March for Women's History Month, NAACP in April, a gospel concert in May, Juneteenth, and planned activities throughout the remainder of the year. So we started to look at lynching. We started the organization to look at lynching, but it's become a launching pad for us to look at various aspects of the black experience. But on Saturday, February 2nd, we have put together this symposium, and we'll start at 10 o'clock. By about 10:25, two scholars from UNC Chapel Hill, Professors Claude Clegg and W. Fitzhugh Brundage, will talk about their research on lynching in North Carolina, specifically Dr. Clegg and Dr. Brundage will look at lynching in the South as a whole. And we also wanted to hear what our high schoolers are thinking and get an idea about what they confront on a daily basis. And so we decided to to select a student from each high school in Orange County, and we gave them a series of questions, and so they're going to respond to those questions, or they can perform, but they have an hour for those 5 students to do something, to give us an idea about what our children are thinking.
What are they
about.
learning now? We've talked about how we didn't get taught very much that we needed to know, and what's happening now with students.
Exactly. So we believe those voices are important. And in addition to that, we have a group of graduate students from North Carolina Central University and here at UNC Chapel Hill. Those 3 students will be looking at Confederate monuments, memorials, and monuments in general. Getting out of there, that's the big thing right now. Essentially, a chancellor will no longer be with us because of Silent Sam. So they'll look at Confederate monuments, and I'm looking forward to what they have to say. And then we're blessed to have with us our Port Laureate, Jackie Shelton Green, who is a native of Orange County, my classmate back in the day in high school. And so she is going to be with us to read or to recite from her published poetry.
It's going to be really powerful. And at the museum in Montgomery, they have over 800 steel monuments, each bearing a victim's name. They hang from the memorial, and in a nearby field, identical monuments wait to be installed where the lynchings occurred. The initiative has cataloged more than 400 racial terror lynchings in 12 southern states between 1877 and the 1950s. So that part of what I think your committee is going to be working towards is there was one official that they researched in that time period, steel monument, and what is in the hope to be able to get it returned here to.
Well, we're talking about actually putting up a memorial somewhere here in Orange County to memorialize the lynching of that victim, Macaulay.
Yeah, Macaulay.
So that's one of the primary reasons we actually came together.
Yeah.
And so we hope to, as we go through that EJI process, that will be the final product, putting up a memorial.
But to do a lot of, it's not the point to just bring that monument back here. The point is the education and for the community.
Yeah, everything that we're doing and will be doing in terms of all programming. So there is we don't stop with the memorial.
Exactly.
This is something that I hope, another generation will take up in Orange County, that this organization will actually continue.
So this is a powerful thing that's going to be happening in several communities. Then Durham has also got a similar organization working on theirs. And this is such a wonderful thing. It's given a focal point to really inspire people to learn more. And I love the fact that you're going to have high school and college students. I mean, that's so important.
Yeah, and I was told by one of the participants last night that one of the participants who will be on the graduate panel, she's a teacher at Northern High School, and she has signed up a lot of her students to come to the symposium on Saturday.
Oh, really? Northern High in Durham?
Right.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, so this is this is, with all the terrible things that are going on in this world, this is such a hopeful thing that for people to learn, and you have to know what's happening, so you change so it doesn't happen again.
Oh, yeah.
Make those changes.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
Yeah.
But we really need to focus on our young people, and one of the things that this organization is devoted to doing as a part of our programming is to bring in younger folk, college-age students, I guess all the way down to middle school. To do things, to actually allow them to initiate planning programs rather than the adults planning for them. To let them plan their own programs.
Yeah, because there's still racial incidents happening in different schools. Orange County had such a difficulty for the school to come to the point, the school board, to not have Confederate symbols. And a lot of it's out of ignorance, just, listening to just these romantic myths, and that's exactly what they are, is myths.
And to do what Orange County did 2 nights ago, to actually admit that, hey, there's this disparity. I guess with the Orange County Board of Education.
Yeah, Orange County Schools.
Yeah. That we have this disparity, this gap between black and white students, and first of all, we have to admit it, and then from that point, initiate policies, programs that will shrink that gap.
Wow. So this was what happened a couple nights ago? There was some meeting about that?
It was the Board of Education in Orange County.
The Board of Education.
Right, decided that indeed there was a gap between black and white students.
Well,
they admitted it.
They admitted it, and now put your money where your mouth is, and actually create the programs that will lessen that gap.
yeah, we had several months ago, maybe it's a year ago now, that wonderful woman, Latondra Strong,
That's the Confederate flag.
who was one of the most fierce people about what was happening in the Orange County schools with Confederate symbols. And she was a powerhouse. She was absolutely wonderful. And not only was she wonderful herself, but she was a terrific organizer. She had gotten a list of, I think, 200 people were involved, on her, whatever the communication thing is, on website or email or whatever, which I'm very hazy about what that is, but she was absolutely wonderful, and I think she didn't give up. She persevered, and then she did make change, and we were so impressed with her. We've had her on at least once and maybe twice, so actually think about Emily or Iris, we really should get her on again in this time of Confederate monuments. They need somebody like her also out with with Silent Sam.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is a lot going on, and you had a meeting about a month ago, sort of to get it started, and this symposium is going to be the real
The opening reception that took place on January 8th.
Yeah.
Here in Chapel.
Yeah.
Chapel Hill.
Yeah, we were
And I think we had
thrilled
about 80, 85 people there for the kickoff.
we were thrilled to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very exciting. It's so good when there's something hopeful and positive going on, where you're learning something and something's being done in a positive way. That really puts out that good energy.
Yeah. I think we have at least 120 people who have registered for the symposium on Saturday.
So don't just show up, you better register first.
Yeah. I think we'll take you if you.
Yeah, if you
Get there.
show up, they're gonna let you in. They're that
There's
kind of
room.
people.
There's
room.
Enough chairs out there.
Yeah. So this, we're looking forward to that. Also, all three of us are going.
Great.
And we're very excited about it. And so you have to have both of you on at a later date to talk about how it went. And so this is the big bang getting started. But I particularly am really heartened about the bringing in the young people.
Yeah, definitely. We had to do that.
Yeah. So you said each month you're going to be having something.
We have something planned throughout the year.
So for February it's a symposium.
Right, and then in March, a women's history activity.
Am I doing the movie? Screening.
Really?
Strange Fruit.
Okay, yeah, but we need to definitely have a women's activity.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have to do
yes,
that.
yeah. This is
Inside
the year
that.
that women.
And then in April, it's an NAACP activity. In May, a gospel concert.
Oh boy.
Renee wrote a proposal. That proposal was funded, and so we're going to bring in people who are going to be singing the songs of Zion.
Oh,
I think it's May 19th. It's going to be over in Hillsborough at the Farmers Market.
well, we gotta get that on the calendar. Is that gonna be in the daytime or the nighttime? Daytime?
2 o'clock. And
Okay.
so Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon. Okay. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up. We'll keep our listeners informed. And we still have a little bit more time. We end at about 5 of, so we got about 7 more minutes. So, is there anything on this particular topic that we didn't talk about that you want to get in there? Maybe we should talk a little bit more about the Orange County guy, McCauley. Do you remember what the story actually was about him?
Yeah, well, actually, that lynching occurred, as so many of them occurred. The reason given was because of his association with a white female. The Wilmington race riot, or the massacre that took place in 1898 was tied to black male, white female. So many of the lynchings that took place. As a matter of fact, George H. White tried to point out that he had this huge list of statistics that he wanted to share with his congressman about why people were lynched, why black men were lynched in the South. And he pointed out that in most cases it had to do with a white female, but that was the reason given in most cases. And it could have had nothing at all to do with that. And so the McCauley lynching of 1898 was also tied to his breaking that old tradition of staying your distance, keeping away from white women.
Well, like
So he
Emmett
talked
Till,
about-
13-year-old boy.
Yeah, same thing with Emmett Till.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
allegedly touched the hand of Miss Bryant, and that was taboo.
And she said in recent, Tim Tyson just recently had an interview with her, and she's admitted that she lied.
Oh, yeah.
And
But that
she
was-
had done it a lot earlier.
Yeah.
But
that was, to say that, to actually violate that taboo
taboo.
meant death for so many. I think that, we concentrate sometimes on the numbers, those 5,000 who may have been lynched, but that is probably a conservative estimate number. It has to do with some kind of corroboration between different sources. When you have those, then we can say that this person was lynched. But what about the number of people for which there is no corroboration of the sources, so to speak?
Yeah, in the dead of the night, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those who may have been thrown in the River, and the Neuse River, and the Tallahatchie River, and the Mississippi River, when no mob actually gathered, or when nothing was actually planned, spontaneous kinds of murders of
Yeah.
folk that
Yeah.
occurred.
well, before you leave us, I wondered if you wanted to say a few words about the course that you are teaching on slavery.
Yeah, this is a course on slavery. I've divided into 3 parts. The first third of it is devoted to looking at enslaved females. in the United States and in the New World as a whole. In the last 20 years, I mean, there has just been this profusion of books and articles and symposia and conferences on a much neglected part of the slave experience. I mean, in North Carolina, by the time we get to 1800, there are as many female enslaved people as there are males. By the time we get to 1850 and 1860, parity is there. And when historians have written about slavery in the past, they have pretty much centered on men. And so now there is just this whole new body of evidence and sources and readings on female slaves. And so we're just having a good time just exploring these articles and books that students didn't know were even there. These are grad students who themselves are just surprised at what is being done in the field of slavery as it relates to female slaves. And we're looking at the slavery from a comparative perspective, looking at slavery in the United States and comparing it to slavery in Brazil and Cuba and Jamaica and other places. They get a sense that slavery didn't happen in a vacuum, that there are many similarities and differences. And then we're looking at some general articles and books on slavery. We're looking at the slave trade. We're looking at slave codes. We're looking at just about every aspect of the slave experience. And we're absolutely having a great time. I have a group of about 17 students who keep us there for 2.5 hours. It's a lot of fun.
So since it's just one night a week.
One night a week, exactly.
It's intense then, yeah.
It's intense, and they have a lot of work. They complain about the work that they have. They have to read quite a few books and articles and write papers. But that's what you do if you plan to be a historian. You got to read, and then read a little bit more, and then you got to write. You got to write a little bit more, and that's what we do.
I bet it's a great course. I was fortunate enough to take it. Tim Tyson had the South in black and white some years ago. I think he taught it for a few years, and it was a participatory course. And the one I went to the first one, it was at the Hayti Center.
Exactly.
And he had buses brought in 50 kids from North Carolina Central, from UNC, and then from Duke, and then 50 community people. So I was lucky to get in as a community person. So, because it's a small place, but it was just wonderful, just wonderful. And but that kind of course is just invaluable. You just learn so much.
You do, without a doubt.
And so they're getting to learn about all the resources that are available that people never realized. Maybe there were so many records kept. And
Yeah, I learn from them because they come with perspectives that these are millennial perspectives. And so I'm actually learning a lot from them. I just sit back sometimes and just allow them to go at it, and I'm learning a lot as well.
Well, they say that's the best part of teaching, is that you learn so much to be a teacher, you know.
Right.
And that's the best kind, where it's a two-way street.
Exactly, lifelong learning.
Yeah. Well, good for you. When you were, before you became a professor emeritus, what did you taught history? Was it mostly centered on slavery, or?
My area is slavery, but I taught Reconstruction and American history in general, African American history.
Okay.
Not only at NCCU, but taught 5 years at UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And Shaw University, A&T. So I've been around a little bit.
And experienced many different kinds of students, huh?
That's exactly right. But NCCU was always the base institution.
The base
home
institution.
institution.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm so delighted that you could come in spite of this weather. And Renee, I appreciate you being here and smiling and encouraging us on, because I was supposed to ask you about a great talk that you gave about the citizenship question Miriam Thompson always calls me before a show to tell me things to be sure to ask. So we'll have to have you back on at a time when your vocal cords are healed, and Professor Parker, we would love to have you back on, maybe some months from now, to tell us how this whole project is going,
Great.
and kind of a follow-up. We'd love to have you.
We'll be glad to.
Both of you? Okay, well, great. We'll see you all next week. And we're on YouTube. Let's not forget that, folks. We're on YouTube now. Hooray for us.
Oh, great.
Okay.